There are large-scale protests against conscription happening in Germany. Some people are even saying they'd rather live under the Russian army than join the German military. Let's take a closer look at this issue today. Let's get right into it. Before we begin, if you want to get the fastest world news updates in the country, please make sure to subscribe to Sense Studio. I'd really appreciate it. As you all probably know, Germany is rearming and preparing to introduce conscription to urgently address its manpower issues. The German Ministry of Defense began moving toward conscription by surveying 700,000 men and women born in 2008 about their willingness to serve. Currently, conscription won't apply to everyone. If troop numbers drop below the target, they plan to add mandatory conscription. Still, politicians stress military service should remain voluntary. Since it's clear that the target will not actually be met, conscription is expected to happen soon. Naturally, the response has been very cold. Tens of thousands of students took to Berlin's streets in protest. Their main slogans also revealed generational conflict. Tens of thousands of students chanted, "Why sacrifice for a country that spends a quarter of its budget on elderly pensions?" according to the Wall Street Journal. In the case of the current protests against conscription happening in Germany, analysts say they are different in nature from the anti-war movements of the Cold War era. Cold War anti-war movements were idealistic, opposing the Vietnam War and nuclear threats, while today's protests are more pragmatic, fueled by economic frustrations. After being forced to make sacrifices due to COVID-19, there's a sense of resistance against being asked to take up arms again for the older generation. The young people currently participating in the protests in Germany say, "In a democratic country, there should be something in return for contributing to the nation," but they say they have received nothing from the country and question how they can risk their lives for a nation that only demands sacrifice. On December 5th, teenagers across the country refused to attend classes and took to the streets to protest. Demonstrations were held in about 90 regions, including Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg. They protested with banners opposing conscription, expressing their anxiety about being forced into the military against their will. Young parents joined the protest. The education office warned students who skipped class without authorization could face discipline, but the protests continued. This time, the German government, aware of these complaints, offered unprecedented benefits. New recruits will receive a monthly salary of about 4,634,631. In Korea, a sergeant receives about 1,501,500 won, so they will be getting almost 3 times as much. On top of that, in Germany, it costs over 6 million won to get a driver's license. It's very expensive, but the government will cover most of the cost. Just like in Korea, the German military also experienced a reversal where new recruits were paid more than their instructors, which caused some dissatisfaction within the military. However, the German government seemed to think they needed to gather more troops, so they pushed ahead with the policy. Even so, the response from young people was lukewarm. Currently, the German government has a plan to increase the standing army from the current 184,000 to 260,000 by 2035, and to triple the number of reservists to 200,000, but to achieve this, they need 60,000, 70,000 new recruits annually. Boris Pistorius, the Minister of Defense, announced that the target for new recruits in 2026 is 20,000, and the general recruitment target is 13,500, but even this is barely enough to make up for those leaving the service. In fact, countries like Poland, the Baltic states, and Sweden did not face massive resistance like Germany did. Especially in Sweden, conscription was abolished in 2010 and then reintroduced in 2018. Rather than causing major social upheaval, there was actually a stronger sense that this was a necessary measure. There are various analyses about why this difference occurred. The key point is that the culture of how the state views the military is completely different. Sweden and the Baltic states view military service not as warmongering, but as a national survival strategy. These countries are either geographically adjacent to Russia or have strong memories of having directly experienced the threat from Russia in their history, because the experience of Soviet influence or invasion threats still lingers in their societies. The prevailing view is that the military is not a choice, but an insurance policy, and national defense is not politics, but reality. So, the reinstatement of conscription is seen not as a means of oppressing the people, but as a preparation to defend the country. On the other hand, Germany has a different structure. After losing World War II, Germany has lived with a strong sense of historical guilt and issues related to its past as Nazi Germany. In German society, the military has long been an uncomfortable symbol. Military uniforms were seen less as symbols of pride and more as relics of nationalism to be approached cautiously. For decades, Germany has maintained an educational system and social atmosphere that emphasizes the country should never again build up its military. In that process, the perception of military service as an honor weakened, and respect for soldiers or their social symbolism gradually disappeared. Moreover, from the perspective of German youth, there is an even more decisive factor. If Russia attacks NATO, the first region to be hit would not be Germany, but Poland. Countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are the ones at risk. German youth start calculating in their minds, why should we die for the Baltic states? That sentiment spreads, and the moment the discussion about conscription comes up, those feelings explode. It's not so much that patriotism has disappeared, but rather that in a situation where the threat of war doesn't feel real, the perception of being forced to sacrifice grows stronger. This is exactly why Germany is shaken differently from other countries, and it's the background for the growing anti-conscription protests within Germany. Still, Germany continues to rearm. Recently, an auto parts factory was converted into an ammunition plant. Rheinmetall, a German defense company, is also building a new shell factory. In the first half of 2025 alone, about 100 civilian companies in Berlin have applied to switch to defense production. It's almost like a trend there. On December 17th, the German Bundestag approved a military equipment purchase plan worth 50 billion euros, or about 86.7 trillion won. This budget included items such as bulletproof vests, bulletproof helmets, infantry fighting vehicles, and missile defense systems like the LO-3. As for the F-35 fighter jets, they are expected to be deployed in the second half of 2027. The new submarines are also scheduled to be delivered in the early 2030s. However, they are trying to speed up the process as much as possible by pouring more money into it. German defense procurement officials are making it clear that the most important task for the German military right now is to fill gaps in NATO's capabilities. In particular, Germany has determined that it can no longer protect Europe by maintaining only a defensive military force as it did in the past. That's why the direction Germany has been emphasizing recently is very clear. Germany is strengthening air defense and also aims to quickly secure precision strike capabilities to hit deep into Russian territory, essentially offensive capabilities. The reason Germany is emphasizing offensive capabilities like this is because they believe that simply defending when attacked is not enough to deter war. If Russia decides to take action, war can quickly spread beyond the borders. At that moment, Germany's strategy is not just to defend, but to neutralize Russia's main bases, where troops, ammunition, and command centers are from the start. That's why Germany has recently focused on air defense missiles, radars, interception systems, short and long-range cruise missiles, ballistic missile defense, and precision-guided munitions. Carsten Stawitzky, a senior German Defense Ministry official responsible for weapons, equipment, and procurement, spoke very directly. He stated that ultimately they want to repel Russia before it crosses the border. This statement is viewed as a symbol of Germany's complete military strategy shift. Previously, Germany was a country that emphasized dialogue to prevent war, but now it has shifted to a stance of preparing to pressure the opponent first and take preemptive action to prevent war. The reason this statement is important is that Germany now believes that defense alone is not enough when it comes to deterring war. This includes the concept that Russia's rear should be shaken and its will to wage war should be challenged before it crosses the border. In other words, the German military is now under pressure to transform from a symbolic force in peacetime to a force that can actually strike the Russian military's command system and logistics infrastructure if war breaks out. And this direction is also connected to Germany's declaration to return as the military core of Europe. The protests against conscription currently happening in Germany may look like generational conflict within the country on the surface. It will likely become a major issue for Europe's security structure. NATO's main defense against Russia is the Eastern Front, Poland, the Baltic states, and Finland, not Germany. Still, Germany is crucial for supporting, supplying, and preparing for a prolonged Eastern Front war. If Germany can't boost its troop numbers, Poland and the Baltic states must hold the front lines, but there will be too few follow-up and reserve forces to support them. If this happens, NATO's ability to continually deploy troops to the Eastern Front, the key factor, will weaken. Russia understands this better than anyone. From Russia's view, the most ideal scenario is Russia conducts repeated provocations instead of full-scale war, making it hard for NATO to respond decisively and destabilizing the East. If Germany hesitates to deploy troops due to internal opposition, NATO could quickly split. The more German youths oppose, the more convinced Russia becomes that Europe has no will to fight, and that conviction may not deter war, but actually increase the possibility of war.